So, today marks the 5th anniversary of a demolition accident in which two men, John Mackay and Tommy Williams, were killed in truly horrific circumstances. I could sit here and regale you with some carefully crafted words about grief, about loss and bereavement, but instead I'm going to read you a letter written by John Mackay's sister, Maggie. In the interest of transparency, I have edited out a small part that relates to the specific cause of the tragedy. For one thing, I don't want to be sued, but far more importantly, I'd hate to prejudice any subsequent court case that might yet arise. Now, I pre-recorded this yesterday, mainly because I didn't trust myself to do it justice live. I can also tell you that the film is about 12 minutes long, but I would urge you to stick around if you possibly can, because there is more to come afterwards. My brother is John Scott Mackay. John was tragically killed at around 2:10 p.m. on Thursday the 19th of September 2019 while working at SSI and Redcar for Nationwide Platforms. He was working as a platform operator along with another man, Tommy Williams. There are no words to express how harrowing and devastated myself, John's wife Anne, my parents, my sister, his kids and the wider family and friends feel at the loss of John. This is a pain like no other I've ever felt before. You would think a corporation like Nationwide Platforms would show some compassion, some empathy towards our loss, but sadly, no. Let me relay to you the catalogue of events. John's wife was informed over the telephone around 5 p.m. of my brother's death. They didn't have the decency to send someone round to speak to her. What a god-awful way to receive such gut-wrenching news. Anne was also told that John was in the burns unit down in Middlesbrough Hospital. This was untrue. Anne found out later that night that John and Tommy were still in the cherry picker basket, where they both lay for 6 more nights, as the site was still deemed to be too dangerous. Following my brother's death, Nationwide Platforms director Colin Hotchkiss and Hayley Holloway from Nationwide's HR department came to Anne's house. Hayley advised Anne she was a family liaison officer, which we now believe not to be true. Anne was advised that Nationwide would be there to help and support both Anne and the family. Sadly, no such support was forthcoming to either Anne or the rest of the family. In total, Nationwide visited Anne twice since my brother was killed. They didn't even have the decency to send a bouquet of flowers, card or letter to either Anne for the loss of her husband, nor my parents for the loss of their youngest child and only son. There are no words. My own employers issued me, within a day, a huge bouquet of flowers and a lovely card. Actions speak volumes. Anne was initially advised that she would receive a death-in-service payment of 2.5 times John's salary, and that Nationwide itself wished to make a donation towards his funeral. Whilst discussing the donation, Hayley made a comment to Anne, "As long as you're not organising a full pipe band." Whether this was meant in jest or not, it was highly inappropriate and downright disrespectful and very hurtful, to say the least. Nationwide also advised that they would pay Anne John's basic wage up to the end of December 2019. Following this meeting, Anne had to chase up Nationwide Platforms regarding John's death-in-service payment and for information relating to the figures for the same. Anne was only then informed that as John started after a specific date, she would be only entitled to 2 years' basic salary, which worked out less than 1 year's salary. Bearing in mind Nationwide Platform made my brother work mandatory overtime, which was not taken into account, nor was the fact that he was killed whilst working. For a corporation such as Nationwide Platforms, their death-in-service policy is inadequate. It does not provide cover for their employees being killed at work or take into account the dangerous work their employees carry out. Nationwide's death-in-service policy stated that a catastrophe, which clearly my brother's death was, only applied where 2 or more employees were working. Access platform operators work solo, so this cover would never apply. This was then followed up by a further meeting with Colin Hotchkiss on the 15th of December, which I attended. He advised us that their death-in-service policy had not been updated since 1990. Neither John's wife nor our family had any idea just how dangerous John's job actually was. Think about it. Could your family survive after your loss on 1 year's salary? Is your life only worth that? I work in an office and I'm provided with more cover than that. At this meeting, Anne was advised that Nationwide Platforms, as a further gesture of goodwill, will be making a further ex gratia payment, but that she would have to cover the tax on this amount. Nationwide will receive a larger payout for the machinery that's been taken out of action. It sickens me to the core that Nationwide's machinery is worth more than my brother's life. Following John's funeral and the meetings with the company, Anne heard nothing more from Nationwide and had to chase them on several occasions for the donation to John's funeral and his death in service payment. She had to chase them again for the ex gratia payment. This made Anne feel awkward, uncomfortable, and made her feel like she was an annoyance or an inconvenience. Every penny from Nationwide was a prisoner. To add insult to injury, 9 weeks after John's death, Anne received a letter dated the 20th of November 2019. It was addressed to John from the company about health and safety and how important their employees are to them. Anne called to advise them, and she was told it was issued in error. You think? I can't tell you how upsetting that was to John's wife to receive such correspondence. The letter was signed off by Colin Hotchkiss. I also wrote to Colin Hotchkiss following the meeting on the 15th and sent a copy to the CEO Don Kenny on both Anne and the family's behalf, requesting various bits of information which he advised he would send us. We also raised the issue of Hayley Holloway's comment. I received a very curt reply from Colin Hotchkiss advising he would not be corresponding with me as I am not John's next of kin. I received no response or recognition from the company CEO. Says it all, really. Following my brother's death and witnessing firsthand how my sister-in-law has been treated, my perception of corporations like Nationwide Platforms is that their employees are only important to them whilst they are alive, because by God they don't give a damn about them when they've been killed on their watch. We've been made to feel as if John did not exist, or that his life didn't matter. Well, John was many things to many people, and the 450 plus people who attended his funeral is testament to that. This for us is not about money, as no amount of money will ever compensate us for the loss of John, nor will it make our suffering any more bearable. This is something we are destined to live with for the rest of our lives. So employees, take note, you are no more than a number on your employer's payroll. The investigation was headed up by D.I. Barker at Cleveland Police and John Heslop from the HSE. Cleveland Police were leading the investigation. During our very first meeting with Chris Barker and John Heslop in December 2019, Chris's words were, "I walked on this site and I said, this is a gross negligence manslaughter case." That comment gave us hope. Never in our wildest dreams did we ever think it would take 5 years to obtain some insight into what actually caused my brother's death. Over the last 4+ years, we've attended many meetings with the police and HSE. We continue to be told they could not tell us anything as the case was ongoing. We did a lot of our own investigations and found out lots of information. Only when we put our findings forward to the police and HSE would they provide us with a somewhat limited response. Our dealings with D.I. Barker were not a pleasant experience. He lied and made promises that he had no intention of keeping, didn't respond to emails and telephone calls. I lodged 2 complaints with Cleveland Police, one dated 13th of January 2021 and the other 4th of June 2021, with regards to D.I. Barker's conduct, both of which were upheld. D.I. Barker had never dealt with such an incident, and his incompetence and lack of experience was obvious. We should have been appointed a family liaison officer who would liaise with the family to provide updates to us. Anne did have a Scottish family liaison officer, or an FLO, from September to December 2019. But that FLO was subsequently withdrawn, as updates were to be provided by D.I. Barker. D.I. Barker subsequently moved to Durham Police. Despite him taking this case with him, he didn't have the decency to contact us to advise us of his move, nor did he provide any forwarding contact details. Following the upholding of our complaints, we were appointed a further contact within Cleveland Police due to the breakdown in the relationship with D.I. Barker. I would like to point out that if it hadn't been for John Heslop of the HSE, we wouldn't have any information other than that which we were told at our first meeting. The HSE's involvement in my brother's case has been outstanding. John Heslop has listened to our rants over the last 4+ years, but he's dealt with them with the utmost compassion and professionalism, and I cannot thank him enough. Following the 5 years of investigation, the police have found there is no case for gross negligence or corporate manslaughter, and the case is now proceeding by way of HSE charges. I lodged a victim's right to review. The findings remain the same: no negligence or corporate manslaughter. The former SSI site is being charged with 20 HSE breaches, and John F. Hunt, the demolition contractor involved, is being charged with 13 breaches. How can there not be gross negligence or manslaughter charges or corporate manslaughter charges and only HSE charges? Following the incident, my sister-in-law received a letter from local Mayor Ben Houchen dated the 18th of October 2019 with his condolences and stated, "Please don't hesitate to contact him." I wrote to him on the 27th of November 2019 requesting his assistance and inviting him to meet with us in Edinburgh. I wrote again on the 5th of March 2020 regarding the lack of progress. I received a response on the 13th of March, and in one paragraph it stated, "As the regional mayor, I have no formal involvement with South Tees site company." Yet he's on social media platforms and the news promoting this site in every which way he can. It would have spoken volumes about the man if he had taken the time to meet with us as a family, given that my brother was killed within his jurisdiction. But he continues to brush under the carpet the fact that 2 men were killed on this site. I also emailed Mr. Houchen a couple of times regarding the lack of response and issues with the police. He was again reluctant to get involved, but did write to the police. But we later saw on TV the 2 of them playing golf together. I say no more. Mr. Houchen on 29th of February wrote to the HSE asking for an update on progress. I can only assume this was due to the up-and-coming elections, as this man has done all he can to avoid us for the last 4+ years. We are now at the stage of proceedings where the HSE have issued their proposed charges to both parties. This time to respond was extended as they needed more time. They've had 4+ years to deal with this. Matters are now with the HSE legal team prior to the case being lodged with the court. If and when the case is ready for lodging, it could be another 2 to 3 years before the case is even heard. In the meantime, Anne has raised a personal injury claim for the loss of John, but is unable to progress matters until the outcome of the HSE case because both parties are blaming each other. In Scotland, John's wife, his children, grandchildren, my parents and his siblings all have a claim. In England, only Anne has such a claim, which is nowhere near what she could claim in Scotland. The English process is utterly farcical. Not until you're in this position do you realise just how poorly families are compensated for the loss of a loved one following a death at work. You're awarded more for hurt feelings than for the ultimate sacrifice of the loss of a life. How does that make any sense? This is John Mackay's sister, Maggie. Now, I said there was more to this story, and there is. As you just heard, John's widow Anne, his sister Maggie, and his entire family have been let down repeatedly by his employer, by the police, and by the judicial system. But that's not all. On Monday this week, Anne Mackay received the following message from the HSE. In my last update to you on the 5th of August, I explained that I was waiting for colleagues in HSE Science Division to provide some additional work that would enable me to conclude my part of the investigation and submit the case to HSE Legal Services Division. I can confirm that the Science Division work will be completed this week, allowing me to finally conclude my report and submit it to our Legal Services Division. Once the Legal Services Division receive my report and a detailed bundle of evidence, they will perform a check to ensure that all relevant documentation is present and has been processed correctly so that it is legally admissible. At this point, they will confirm that our lawyer has taken control of the case and they will review my findings and make a decision whether or not to prosecute. I will provide you with a further update no later than Tuesday, the 15th of October 2024, and can assure you that I'm determined to have the case with our lawyer by that date. Now, it's not much, and it doesn't really change anything, but at least the HSE responded, unlike some. Back in June of this year, Anne Mackay also wrote to Duncan Riddell, the incumbent CEO of the National Federation of Demolition Contractors, to explain her frustration and to plead for his support. In fairly short order, Anne received a message from Mr. Riddell saying that he was in receipt of her letter and that he would respond to her further. That was in June. We're now approaching the end of September, and she has still received no such response. The family of John Mackay and presumably Tommy Williams have been failed time and time and time again. As Maggie said in her letter, it seems that employees in this business are just a number on a payroll spreadsheet.